tere! Täna jätkame virtuaalse revolutsiooni lahkamist ja vaatame, mis maksab see, mis mitte midagi ei maksa. Ja tänast filmi aitab meil sisse juhatada Tartu Ülikooli ajakirjanduse ja kommunikatsiooni instituudi juhataja Pille Pruulmann-Vengerfeldt. Pille hiljaaegu kirjutas Linnar Viik Postimehes samal teemal, millest filmiski juttu on, et internet mitte ei laienda minu valikuid, vaid kipub neid viimasel ajal hoopis kitsendama. Näiteks kui ma Google'is kirjutan midagi otsingusse, siis hakatakse mulle pakkuma asju, mida ma juba varem olen valinud. Või veel tulevad hoopis välja mingisugused suhteliselt kummalised valikud. Kellele see kasulik on, et minu valikuid kitsendatakse?
No, enne kõike Google argumenteerib, et see on kasulik sulle endale. Sellepärast, et sinu enda otsingu kiirus enamasti sa ei pane tähele, et sa millestki ilma oled jäetud. Sest enamasti saad sa selle, mis sul on vaja, kätte esimese 3 valiku seas esimesel leheküljel ja sa oled väga rahul sellega, sest keegi teine on sinu jaoks ära teinud selle olulisuse otsuse ja nagu filmis kenasti näidatakse, see olulisuse otsus ei ole mitte ühe inimese otsus, vaid see olulisuse otsus on sinu enda varasemate valikute, väga paljude teiste inimeste internetikäitumise valikute taga ja tõenäosus, et sa saad sealt selle, mis sulle vaja on väga suur. Tõsi küll, on teatud hulk inimesi, kes jäävad ilma millestki. Ja probleemiks võib-olla kõige rohkem on see, kui me ei tea, et me millestki ilma jääme. Sest kui me teame, et see, mis me täna kätte saime,
ei ole veel kõik.
Ei ole veel kõik, lähtub sellest, mida me oleme varem teinud, teadnud ja kui me oleme näiteks aktiivselt vasakpoolsete vaadetega, aga tahame midagi rohkem teada parempoolsest poliitikast, siis piisab sellest, kui me saame aru, et kui me saame ainult parempoolsuse kriitikat, siis see ei saa olla kogu tõde.
Jah, internet ei saa olla täis ainult ühte laadi informatsiooni. Aga kas me siis võime öelda, et Google on tegelikult niisugune, päris geniaalne ärimudel meie informeerimise sildi all?
Tähelepanu on kõige kallim ressurss. Ja Google ütleb, et tead, me aitame sul säästa seda 24 tundi, pakkudes sulle kiiremaid otsinguid, paremaid tulemusi, vahetumalt ja kiiremalt seda kõike kätte. Ja kui me selle käigus veel raha teeme, mis selles halba on? Ja mõnes mõttes ongi see küsimus, et võib-olla ei olegi midagi halba. Ongi tõepoolest geniaalne ärimudel, kus on hundid söönud, lambad terved ja me võidame hästi asetatud reklaamide pealt selle, et me saame tõepoolest mõistlikku teenust mõistliku hinnaga. Sest küsimus ei ole mitte selles, et kas Google aitab meil üles leida selle, mis on kõige odavam või kas Google aitab meil üles leida selle, mis on kõige parem, vaid küsimus on optimaalsuses. Kas me leiame mõistliku hinnaga, mõistliku kvaliteediga toote üles tänu Google'i osavalt paigutatud otsingusõnadele?
Me kasutame interneti väga palju selleks, et me lihtsalt shoppame seal või me otsime meelelahutust. Et kas need asjad hakkavadki siis vaikselt muutuma inimeste jaoks järjest olulisemaks?
Internet pakub erinevatele inimestele erinevaid lahendusi. Ja siin on nüüd hästi oluline aru saada sellest, et internet ei ole mitte üks terviklik asi, vaid on olemas väga palju internette, mille efektiivsus, mõju ja see, mis seal sisaldub, sõltub ikkagi igast üksikust inimesest.
Aitäh, Pille Pruulmann-Vengerfeldt, selle kommentaari eest. Ja vaatajaile head otsustamist, kas me siis maksame midagi selle eest, mis justkui mitte midagi ei maksa.
See on lugu vaiksest revolutsioonist, mis mõjutab kõiki inimesi planeedil. Lugu sellest, kuidas meist said kaasosalised tehingus, mis kujundab meie maailma ümber. 20 aastat pärast loomist pakub üleilmne veeb meile enneolematu ligipääsu informatsioonile ja see on tasuta.
The benefit of a freely available source of all the world's information that literally touches every human being who can get anywhere near an internet is phenomenal.
The web is about connecting humanity. Right? The web is humanity connected.
Ent sel kingitusel on oma hind. Me maksame kaubaga, mis on vahest kullastki kallim. Delikaatse informatsiooniga iseenda kohta.
People have to think more carefully about what information they want to put out and how it should be used.
I think that people are only beginning to understand what it might mean to post things about yourself on the internet.
You should lead your life differently. You should not post a photo. You probably shouldn't even take a photo that you don't want spread. I would advise against sex tapes.
Dr. Alex Krotoski on uurinud viimased 10 aastat veebi virtuaalset revolutsiooni. See film on vahest kõige sügavamast ja häirivamast väärtuste nihkest, mis veebiga kaasas käib. Ning sellest, mida see meile kõigile tähendab. Kuidas meie veebis väljendatud mõtteid, ihasid jälgitakse, sõelutakse ja kasumijahil ära kasutatakse.
The product online is not the content. The product online is you.
There's a risk-reward ratio here, and for us the reward is so great that whatever the risk is, we try and contain it and understand it.
This is the story of the individual, moral, and social cost of free, and whether that is a price worth paying.
See on West Point. Siinses akadeemias on üle 200 aasta õpetatud välja Ameerika Ühendriikide armee sõjalist eliiti. Just siin on õppinud sõjakunsti MacArthur, Eisenhower ja Schwarzkopf. 21. sajandil ei õpetata siin kadettidele üksnes lahingutaktikat ega laiemate strateegiliste plaanide koostamist, vaid ka seda, kuidas tulla toime ohuga, mis lähtub kodule lähemalt. Nende õppeplaani kuulub nüüd ka veeb.
You've all heard of Trojans? It basically puts your computer under the control of someone else.
Kolonileitnant Craig Conti ülesanne on kadettidele selgeks teha, mil kombel muudab veeb nii valitsused kui ka inimesed, kes seda kasutavad, eriti haavatavaks.
Numbers vary, but
the web's one of the most popular technologies in the history of mankind. Every day a new company comes online offering new products, new services, and the tools are very compelling and they're very powerful. But what we're doing is really disclosing an unprecedented amount of information about ourselves to third parties, and that makes me very, very concerned. Digital information is slippery, and once it's out there, it moves, and you can't put the genie back into the bottle once it's out there.
Are we being naive about the amount of information that we're putting online?
We all want something for nothing. So every website we go to, every shiny new tool or service that's out there on the web, many people flock to it. And we need to consider, as we're using those tools, what are we giving away in return for this free product or service that we're getting? What are the risks involved, both on what we're giving away and the fact that the service may disappear tomorrow or may be bought by another company. So we might like their mascot now and we trust them and we like the colors of their logo, but they might not be the same company tomorrow.
"20 years on from its invention, the web confronts us with a huge dilemma that's only now becoming fully apparent. Our everyday web use remains overwhelmingly free. We read news for free, we do searches for free, and we connect with friends and family for free. Or so we think. Few of us realize just how we are paying."
Kui palju küsiksite teie võõrastelt oma intiimse päeviku lugemise eest? Kui palju läheks neile maksma teie usuliste, poliitiliste ja seksuaalsete eelistuste või näiteks teie laste kooli teada saamine? Kas nii palju, et keegi ei suuda seda maksta? Kuid just seda laadi informatsiooni me iga päev rutiinselt jagamegi ning pealegi tohutus ulatuses. Kogu maailma kasutajad sooritavad Google'is igas kuus umbes 76 miljardit tasuta otsingut. Laeme päevas üles 3 miljonit fotot või videot, et neid Flickris sõpradega tasuta jagada. Igas kuus lehitseb hinnanguliselt 350 miljonit meist tasuta maailma 10 miljonit blogisid, kuid vaadakem nüüd asja teistpidi. Ja me näeme, et tasuta teenus on pelgalt illusioon. Igas kuus kogub Google miljardid otsitud mõisteid, mis aitavad neil oma otsingusüsteemi täiustada ja müüa ülima täpsusega sihitatud reklaami. Flickr saab igas kuus 3 miljonit fotot või videot, mille kõrvale sokutada reklaam. Igas kuus võimaldab osa blogisid istutada meie arvutitesse väikese jälitusfaili, mida nimetatakse eufemistlikult küpsiseks ja mis paljastab kommertsvõrgustikele meie eelistused, et nad saaksid saata meile asjakohasemat reklaami.
The Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, I think they are the rubber balance of the 21st century, but their manner of presenting their ideas and their power is much cleverer, more sophisticated than the 19th century. But I think in 100 or 200 years, when we look back at the Googles and the YouTubes and the Yahoos, we will see people very similar to the Carnegies and the Rockefellers and the Stanfords who drove the Industrial Revolution.
We are being judged as we're walking around the internet by who the cookies say we are and who we declare we are by our Facebook profile or our Twitter stream or what information we put into whatever website we might go to. This is a societal shift not unlike when we moved from the farms to the village, from the village to London. And all of a sudden we had to develop a social system that understood how we lived cheek by jowl in crowded areas.
The reality is, online life is a trade. You pay for a free web with the currency of information about who you are as a user and what your clicks across the web say you're interested in. Every day in this way, we are handing over the minutiae of our lives in exchange for a free and convenient online space.
Et mõista, kuidas oleme saanud veebist tarbekaubaks, tuleb minna 16 aastat ajas tagasi ja vaadata suure äri esimesi katsetusi online maailma koloniseerimisel. Ning see lugu algab veidral kombel pitsast. 1994. aastal sai Pizza Hutist veebikaubanduse pioneer. Nad alustasid tellimuste vastuvõtmist internetis. Seda nimetati pizzanetiks. See kiirtoidu virtuaalne revolutsioon sai alguse siin, unises Santa Cruzi linnas Californias, mille elanikkond oli tol ajal kõige internetiseeritum maakeral. Nüüd näeb pizza tellimine interneti vahendusel enesestmõistetav, ent tol ajal oli see suur uudis.
What becomes clear when talking about PizzaNet is the incredulity with which people treated this new innovation. I mean, it even made the front page of the business section of a national newspaper. As recently as 16 years ago, people just didn't know if online commerce would work or not.
Veebi lõid algselt teadlased, kes soovisid jagada informatsiooni omavahel. Kommertsandmete liiklus oli välistatud. Tol ajal arvati, et veeb ja raha ei sobi üldse kokku.
The spirit of the web, the beginning, was of people working, as it were, under the bedclothes with the light on. People working after other people had gone home and installing a web server and sending me an email saying, oh, by the way, at the end of work today, I installed this web server, I put some photographs on it, hope you like it.
It seemed like a brave new world. It seemed like a new democracy. It seemed like a new way of people coming together.
There was this other dimension to human experience, which is really hard to relate to today, that had nothing to do with money.
Ent 1994. aastaks oli Ameerika Ühendriikide kongress veebi kommertskeelu tühistanud. Veeb oli ühtäkki ärile avatud. Interneti hakkas kasutama üha rohkem inimesi, kes lootsid endiselt eest leida tasuta ruumi, kuid ka äri hakkas nägema selles uut võimalust enneolematut kasumit teenida. Kui varase veebi juured on California akadeemilises ja vastukultuuris, siis veebi esimese suurema äriettevõtte juured olid New Yorgis, kus sündis unistus täiesti uutest interaktiivsetest suhetest klientidega.
I think the thing that we got right is a true obsessive focus on customer experience.
Amazonist on saanud maailma kõige populaarsem interneti ostukeskkond. Neil on kogu maailmas 124 miljonit klienti, kes ostavad kõikvõimalikke tooteid, alates Amazoni alustalast raamatutest kuni televiisorite, toidu ja rõivasteni. Jeff Bezos oli 1994. aastal ühe New Yorgi riskikindlustusfondi analüütik ja nägi nüüd jahmatusega, kui suured on veebi äsja avanenud kaubanduslikud võimalused.
Web usage was growing at 2,300% a year, and I had never seen anything grow that quickly. And even though it was clear that sort of baseline usage of the web was very small, most people hadn't heard of the web in 1994, it was also pretty clear that anything growing that fast, though tiny today, is going to be ubiquitous tomorrow.
He had a very, I think, Napoleonic scale to what he wanted to do from the beginning. But meanwhile, the step one was making the bookstore. And that in and of itself was a very unusual undertaking.
Bezos realized that the fundamental problem with conventional bookstores is their size. This one, for example, can hold about 5,000 titles, so no matter how well run it is, the choice will always be limited.
What you could do online that you could never do in a physical store is build a bookstore with complete selection, universal selection. So that became the founding dream of Amazon.
Kui Amazon oli tee rajanud, järgnesid teised. Veebi kommertsialiseerumine oli osturevolutsiooni algus ja põhimõtteline pööre veebi väärtustes.
The rate of growth was astounding. If you needed any other reassurance that you were onto something huge, the company was just taking off like nothing else in the history of retail.
Üleilmne, kohene ja tasuta ruum sai üleilmseks, koheseks ja tasuta turuks. Kogu maailmas otsisid ettevõtjaid teid, kuidas ratsarikkaks saada.
We were reinventing our entrepreneurialism, our kind of creativity. And maybe there was a sense that some of the older industries were changing. This was a time when youth and vibrancy and dynamism were going to be celebrated in this country in a kind of US-style way.
This was a very exciting time. I think sort of excitement was justified.
Aastail 1995 kuni 2000 registreeriti üle 20 miljoni .com domeeni nime.
In a very few short years we've got to the spectacle of billionaire teenagers with barely descended testicles spraying the stock exchange. Who can say what the e-world will be like in another 5 years? There's optimism that always attends such a bright new technology and the future that it seems to beckon. It didn't last long. It didn't last long with me, not because I'm cynical, I think, but because history has given us enough examples.
Uus vapper veeb sai rahatrükkimise synonüümiks.
Investor stocks have gone up an estimated $1.25 trillion.
Sales online have doubled since last year.
The 90s were insane.
You were having just buckets of money poured over your head.
In recent weeks, all the stock indexes have rallied to new records, led by the incredible surging internet stocks.
How hot is NASDAQ right now? Smoking. Red hot.
America Online, the auction site eBay, and the book dealer Amazon, all up more than 40% in December alone.
The internet has become the center of the technology universe. The internet is being viewed, rightly or wrongly, as the next industrial revolution.
So much money sloshing around and people getting crazy valuations for their businesses.
Every experiment got tried. Every experiment got funded, including the things that didn't make any sense.
Across the board, people had invested millions in web companies with a great name, a great idea, but they hadn't figured out how to make any money yet. Apparently that could be fixed later. It was a recipe for financial carnage.
2000. aasta algul kaotas Nasdaq veerandi oma väärtusest. Pooled .comi pühiti järgnenud rüüstes lihtsalt minema. Aasta jooksul lendas tuulde $3,5 miljardit. Spekulatsioonide keerises jätsid investorid tähelepanuta riskid, mis võeti kindla väljavaateta garanteeritud tulule.
think that people got overexcited and believed that the web was creating a completely new way of doing business because it was. And in many ways, it was totally disrupting existing business models. I think that people then thought any old business might work, which was kind of the logic that perhaps was flawed.
People got confused and thought that, oh, if you had a lot of web traffic, that must be incredible. No, building a lot of branches, that's more of a unique asset that somebody else can't duplicate. Building a website, was a kind of overnight thing. And so most of those companies weren't adding that much value. They just hoped that somebody who knew what they were doing would buy them, or somehow their scale would allow them to luck onto a business model.
.com buum tõi veebi miljoneid uusi kasutajaid ja muutis selle peavoolukanaliks ning kompaniid said õppetunni, et ei piisa pelgalt tavaliste poodide online-versiooni loomisest, vaid nad peavad välja mõtlema, mis võimaldab veebis kasumit teenida. Tänapäeval leidub üks kompanii, kes on selle paremini välja mõelnud kui keegi teine. Selle aluseks oli endisaegne vaba veebi eetos, kuid nüüdseks on muutunud firma ajaloo suurimaks rahamasinaks. Ja ta on muutunud meie kõigi jaoks internetis surfamise olemust.
This company learned to make money from the web, but in doing so, it turned its consumers into commodities. How? By transforming our innocuous and apparently free search for information into an enormous money spinner. This company is Google, and it's turned our curiosity into its gold mine.
Tänapäeval on kogu veeb Google'i erakordselt tugevas haardes.
Google today is better than Google yesterday because we just launched a bunch of things that made it better. And it'll be better tomorrow because we're going to launch a bunch of things tonight. It's constantly getting better.
Google annab veebile mõtte. Iga päev sooritatakse Google'i otsingumootoritega 40 keeles üle 2 miljardi otsingu.
Normally you'd ask a smart person for advice on anything, but now you type into Google and you get tons and tons more information back than you ever got before.
Kuid Google pole üksnes otsingumootor. Selle tasuta videote jagamise sait YouTube on omandamas televisiooni ilmet.
We crossed the 1 billion view mark per day that we're serving.
Me võime Google'i appi võtta ja lennata üle maakera või piiluda üle naabrite tara. Google on esitanud isegi väljakutse suurimale arvutifirmale Microsoftile, luues oma veebilehitseja ja operatsioonisüsteemi, mis konkureerib Windowsiga. Erinevalt Microsoftist muudab Google'i nii ainulaadseks ja eriliseks see, et nad on muutunud maailma üheks kõige rikkamaks ja mõjuvõimsamaks kompaniiks, jagades peaaegu kõik oma pakutava tarbijatele tasuta. Et seda näivat paradoksi mõista, tuleb piiluda kulisside taha maailma, mille Google on üles ehitanud. See on Google'i tuksuv süda. Sellistes andmekeskustes talletab Google informatsiooni veebi ja teemade kohta, mida me otsime. 2009. aasta viimases kvartalis teenis Google sedalaadi andmekeskusi läbinud infovahetuse pealt üle $200 igas sekundis. Nende aastane kasum oli $6,5 miljardit ja see raha tuleb reklaamist, mis on sihitatud täpselt informatsiooni järgi, mida me Google'ile anname. Iga kord, kui me Google'it kasutame, aitame neil raha teha. Alex Grotowski kohtus Silicon Valley Piibli ajakirja Wired toimetajaga, kes on näinud ette Google'i järjepidevat tõusu.
One could definitely argue that Google is an advertising company. It's, lots of people do search. And one could argue that Google search is not significantly better or worse than Microsoft's or AOL's or anybody else's. But its hold over advertising is unmatched.
Why do you think the Google business model has worked?
The Google business model is genius. All of the things it does, calendar, mail, maps, photo management, all this sort of stuff, both can be given away for free because the cost of delivering that digital service to you is so low, and increases your attachment to Google. And it will make money from you someday. And whether it makes money when you go to search and it runs ads there, whether it makes money because it's putting ads against other third-party content that you're using, if you have a critical mass of people using Google as a search engine and the largest pool of ads against which to run against these search terms, you're able to match them better. And if you can match them better, advertisers are inclined to use you more, and this becomes a sort of self-reinforcing positive feedback loop. What Google has is not so much a monopoly on search. The switching costs of search are pretty, one click away. What it has is the beginnings of a monopoly over internet advertising.
Iroonia seisneb selles, et Google'i tänane turuliidri positsioon on alguse ja idealismist nii kaugel, kui vähegi olla saab. Et mõista, miks Google on saanud sedavõrd rikkaks ja mõjukaks, tuleb minna tagasi idealistlikuma perioodi juurde kompanii ajaloos. Nagu veeb ise, nii kasvas ka Google välja akadeemilisest unistusest. Stanfordi ülikool Californias on hinnatud akadeemilise kvaliteedi poolest, kuid kooli vilistlastel on olnud ka erakordne võime pöörata oma uuringud rahaks.
You don't go to Stanford and not know that there's a very high probability that when you get to the end of graduate school, you are going to start a company, or you might never get to the end of graduate school because you're going to start a company.
1996. aastal olid Larry Page ja Sergey Brin doktoriõppes ja uurisid võimalusi, kuidas eristada asjalikud veebilehed rämpsust. Tollaegne veeb sisaldas ligikaudu 10 miljonit kodulehte võrreldes tänapäevaste 10 miljardite saitidega. Kuid maht kasvas väga kiiresti, nii et juba sel ajal oli inimestel võimatu iga veebilehte külastada ja hinnata. Page ja Brin arendasid arvutitele välja võimaluse teha see töö automaatselt ära. Alex Kratoski läheb kohtuma nende mentori professor Terry Vinogradiga, et nende läbimurdest rohkem teada saada.
They realized that every time a person puts a link on their own web page to some other page, they are in a sense voting. They're in a sense saying that's interesting enough for me to put a link there. And therefore, if they could add up all of those votes from everybody who built web pages, they would get a result which was going to be a very close approximation to what really is interesting to the general public.
Page ja Brin töötasid välja algoritmi, mille abil loendati veebilehtede vahelisi linke. Selle tulemusel saadi sõltumatu matemaatiline hinnang, kas lehekülg on huvitav, lähtudes linkide arvust sellele, ning kas leheküljed, kus lingid üles pandi, on ise huvitavad. Page ja Brin mõistsid, et tööd, mis sai alguse akadeemilise projektina, saab kasutada ka veebi ühe suurima kitsaskoha ületamiseks. Kuidas leida üles seda, mida otsid?
So what is the relationship between interestingness and search?
So having figured out a way to decide which pages were interesting to what degree with PageRank, then it was possible to give search results that were much more useful. So when you did a search for computer, say, and it would find all the pages would say the word computer on it, then the ones that it gave me at the top, the beginning, at the first page, would be the ones that have the most interestingness, which means that they're the ones I'd be likely to really want to go look at, not the stray junk. So that improved to a tremendous degree the kind of results you could give.
Tulemuseks oli seni kõige tõhusam otsingumootor. Page ja Brin panid sellele nimeks Google. Ja Google lõikas veebi kiirest paisumisest 1990. aastate lõppu .com buumi ajal kasu, sest nende linkide loendamise algoritm muutus aina paremaks, seda mööda, kuidas veebilehti juurde tekkis. Kuid nende ette kerkis ka probleem. Iga kord, kui keegi Google'it kasutas, pruukis ta aga veidi nende arvutiserverit. Lihtne digitaalne tehing, nagu otsing võib maksta tühise summa, ent kui miljonid tühised summad kokku liita, on tulemuseks terve varandus.
The problem for Google was that as the web expanded, it required more and more expensive processing power and more expensive storage. But it didn't have a real way of making sure that money was coming in.
Larry would come back for advice now and then. He'd just come to the office and we'd have a chat and we'd talk about the technology and what they were building, and it was all great. And then I'd say, well, but how are you ever going to make money with this? And he would give this sort of smile, little look and say, I don't know, we'll figure that out later.
Most search engines at that time were funded by advertising, but Larry and Sergey didn't like that. In fact, this is the research paper that they used to present Google to the academic community. And what they said was, we believe the issue of advertising causes enough mixed incentives that it's crucial to have a competitive search engine that is transparent and in the academic realm.
Niisugune nägi Google välja 1998. aastal. Reklaamivaba, lihtne, puhas ja valge. Sellisena peegeldab Google varase veebi asjaarmastajalikkust. Ent ideaalidest hoolimata pidi Google siiski oma arved maksma. Klientidelt tasu võtmise mõtte maeti kiiresti maha. Selle asemel nägi Google võimalust kasutada oma otsingumootorit reklaamimajanduse revolutsioneerimiseks. Ning see muutis ka meie ja veebisuhteid. Nad teadsid, et kui me midagi otsime, reedame neile oma täpsed soovid ja ihad. Ning sellise süsteemiga nagu neil sai meid kergesti kinni püüda ja maha müüa.
What if you knew precisely what your customers wanted at any time and could instantly provide them with it? Well, that's the holy grail that marketers and advertisers have been searching for decades. Because with that information, they could create tailor-made ads that would target directly the customers who were likely to buy their products without wasting money on the people who wouldn't.
Vaid 2 aastat pärast reklaami suhtes kahtluse avaldamist võtsid Page ja Brin reklaami tõsiselt käsile ning muutsid selle majandusaru igaveseks süsteemiga AdWords. Tippinud otsitava mõiste ilmuvad Google'i leheküljel 2 sektsioonis reklaamid. Kui te klikite ühele neist, voolab raha otse Google'ile ja reklaamiandja maksab kinni teie liikluse nende saidil. Nii lihtne see tarbijatele ongi. Kuid reklaamifirmadele muudab selle eriliseks täpne sihitatus. Müügiprotsessi algatab tarbija, kes otsib midagi väga konkreetset.
Unlike the failed .coms, AdWords seem to be the perfect marriage between what the web can do and what consumers want.
The first rule of the internet is that you can speak to each individual as though they're a different person. It's not a broadcast mechanism, it's a narrowcasting mechanism. And what AdWords is it's a single ad to a single person every time.
It's catching people in motion. It's catching people who are already in motion towards something, already goal-oriented, already halfway there.
Sihipärase reklaamiga tarbijatele on leidnud Google ja koos nendega kogu veeb võimaluse end kinni maksta. Ent Google'i auahnus läheb kaugemale isegi rahast.
Page and Brin wanted to transform the web itself. They built into their advertising machine the analytical insight of their search engine. And crucially, this was what cemented Google's influence on the web.
Nende eesmärk oli filtreerida tarbijale tähtsad reklaamid ebaolulistest. Iga kord, kui te käivitate Google'it, kasutades AdWordsi programmi, vallandab see sündmuste ahela, mida saab illustreerida järgmiselt. Ütleme, et autofirma soovib oma reklaami ilmumist lehel esimesel kohal, kui keegi otsib tulemusi sõnadele uus auto. Nad ütlevad Google'ile summa, mida on valmis reklaami ilmumisest maksma. Olemuselt on tegemist oksjoniga, kus esimese koha eest võib võistelda hulk firmasid. Kuid Google ei pruugi tingimata anda esikohta suurima summa pakkujale, vaid hindab reklaame selle järgi, kui heas vastavuses on need otsitava sõna ja kvaliteedi indikaatoritega reklaamiva firma kodulehel. Lihtsamalt öeldes võrdub hind B, mida võitja maksab, pakkumise väärtuse ja kvaliteedi korrutisega. See määrab esimese koha hinna. Sel kombel ei lõika Google üksnes kasu, vaid esineb ka interneti kvaliteedi ja asjakohasuse mõjuka arbiitrina.
Google will make the entire world's information available to you, and occasionally will show you some advertisements. If you want to click on those ads, there might be something very valuable for you to click on, but you don't have to. I think that's the trade.
AdWords is what made Google the dominant player on the web, and very quickly the rest of the web fell into line behind this model. Offer your products and your services for free while funding it behind the scenes with highly targeted advertising. Now, the irony is that this ultra-capitalist model requires that the web stay true to its non-capitalist roots. It has to remain an open network, easy to search, with no pay-per-view and no areas that Google can't go.
See nägemus avatud veebist nõuab ka meilt kasutajatelt oma osa. Silmadega õgimist virtuaalses kommipoe tasuta sisus. Mida kauem me surfame, mida rohkem tähelepanu pöörame, seda rohkem hangivad kõikmõeldavad ärid informatsiooni ja seda rohkem saavad reklaami müüa.
The product online is not the content. The product online is you. The product online are the eyeballs looking at that content and as much information about how to influence the hands connected to those eyeballs as possible.
But if trading information on web users is the driving principle behind a free web, then where do you stop? Where does the boundary lie between our rights and the search for profits? Today, we are experiencing surveillance that we could never have imagined 20 years ago. Here's one example amongst many, Google's email system.
Iga kord, kui te saadate Gmaili, skaneerib see automaatselt teie teksti, et leida võtmesõnu, mis võivad paljastada teksti sisu.
So if you write the word beach in your message, then ads down the side of the page might be about holidays. Or if you write about your pet, then you might get ads for pet accessories, medicine, dog walkers.
Kui korraldate sõpradega kohtumist linnas, võivad ilmuda reklaamid kohalike kuumade paikade kohta.
Or recipes for weight loss, then you'll get ads for healthy food or dieting courses. The email service you're getting is free, but Google's computers are listening in on the contents of your email and matching them with advertising that they think might be relevant to you. That is the price that you pay.
Google viitab sellele, et kõik tasuta meiliteenused skaneerivad elektronkirju, kuid Gmail austab privaatsust, sest kõrvalistele isikutele sisu ei avaldata. Nad väidavad oma veebilehel, et annavad teada, millist informatsiooni nad koguvad, kui te nende tooteid ja teenuseid kasutate, miks nad koguvad ja kuidas nad seda teie veebikogemuse täiustamiseks kasutavad. Kuid see ei käi üksnes Google'i ja elektronkirjade kohta. Internetireklaam läheb kaugemale. Reklaamiandjad soovivad väga teada meie käitumist veebis ning et paremini mõista, mida me soovime, seiravad meie lehitsemisharjumusi.
It's called behavioral targeting. Think of it like going on a shopping spree and accumulating lots of bags. When you buy something, you become laden with bags. The branding on the bags quickly gives away to onlookers where you've been and what types of things you've been buying, and what you're likely to buy in the future, all of which is very valuable to advertisers.
Samamoodi töötab ka online-reklaam. Kui me külastame mõnda veebilehte, mis sisaldab reklaami, saadab reklaamifirma server meie arvutisse küpsise, tillukese faili, mis meie arvutit teiste seas eristab. Kui me surfame edaspidi veebis, jälgib küpsis, kus me käime ja registreerib meie huvid reklaamifirmas. Seejärel saavad nad reklaami täpsemalt suunata. Kui me käime autolehel, saame autoreklaami, kui me käime reisilehel, saame reisireklaami. See on väga lihtne, kuid tekitab paljudele ka sügavat muret.
By monitoring somebody's web behaviour, you can build up a picture of who they're talking to, what they're reading, what they consume, and that can be an incredibly intimate and potentially powerful profile of somebody's life.
Many of these judgments can only be quite poorly made out because they don't know the context you're in. So if somebody's looking up material on cancer, is that for me? Is that for a friend? Is it for a piece of coursework? And, of course, real decisions can follow from that.
I'm really not so vexed by behavioural advertising and targeting. I think that as long as it's transparent at some level and you, the consumer or the user, have the ability to find out what is being kind of used to your benefit, your supposed benefit, then I feel quite relaxed about it and actually think that it can be an exciting leap forward.
Me oleme näinud, et meie veebiotsingute hinnaks on muutumine reklaamiobjektiks. Me maksame mõne elektronkirja teenuse eest, lastes oma läkitusi reklaamivõimaluste huvides skaneerida. Ja me maksame lehitsemise eest, lastes küpsistel end jälitada.
Consumers are becoming the consumed. We are watched and traded. If this wasn't enough, web commerce seems to be evolving one step further and perhaps in a more troubling direction. It's attempting to bury itself deeper in our minds, to try to shape what it is that we want before we even know that we want it. And this is where the old .coms come back into our story.
Nagu Google, nii on paljud online jaekaupmehed oma klientide kohta info kogumisel ja analüüsimisel targemaks saanud.
We study your past purchase history and then use that in a statistical way to make predictions about what other things in this massive catalog of products that you might be interested in.
See, millest Jeff Bezos räägib, on terve uus vastastikuse toimetasand tarbijate ja uue kommertsialiseerunud veebi iseloomuliku tunnuse soovitusmootorite vahel.
As you start looking for cameras, you start to see people who clicked, who looked at this also looked at that. People who bought this, people who clicked at this bought that. In the course of your clicking, the service becomes more useful to you.
One way to think about that is we're sort of redecorating the store for each customer who walks in. If you think about a physical store, that would be impossible. You can't run around and rearrange the furniture and put the products that that particular individual customer might like most up front. Very, very difficult. But in an online store, of course, you can do that. You can redecorate the store for each individual customer. You can help people find things that they might not have ever been able to find any other way.
Soovitusmootorid võimaldavad müüjatele oma pakkumisi pidevalt personaliseerida, et need vastaksid meie huvidele ja käitumisele. Kliendi põhjalik tundmine annab veebikompaniidele reaalse maailma müüjatega võrreldes edumaa. Üks paremaid näiteid selle kohta on eelis, milles annab täielikult veebipõhisele filmilaenutusfirmale Netflix konkurentsis kividest ja mördist hiiu Blockbusteriga.
We look at movies as a really rich area to try to understand human behavior and how to create a better experience than any other video system so that people watch more and more movies.
Nende äri aluseks on Arvuti algoritm nimega Cinematch, mis määratleb klientide eelistuste alusel, millised DVD-d võiksid neile veel meeldida.
Movie taste is very personalized. But what we realized is if we ask people to tell us what other movies they've loved in the past, that our computer systems can do a really good job of helping them choose movies that they're more likely to enjoy in the future.
Netflixil on praegu üle 12 miljoni abonendi ja käibe $1,5 miljardit aastas. Näib, et miljonid inimesed on soovitussüsteemidega rahul ja õnnelikud selle üle, mida nad vastu saavad. Kuid teised on mures, et me oleme selles protsessis vahest midagi kaotanud.
I wonder if recommendation systems don't defeat the point of the web. Isn't the vast possibility that the web offers for serendipity to bring us unexpected new ideas from accidental encounters being replaced by a process that apparently broadens our horizons but actually sells us the same things?
Amazon, because we carry universal selection, really dehomogenizes culture. It lets people pick the products that they want. You get to read the books that you want, not just the books that were cherry-picked and hand-selected to fit into a store of a certain size.
Kuigi veeb võimaldab meil valida tohutu kauba hulga seas sobiva, ei tähenda see veel automaatselt, et me seda võimalust kasutame. Ääretust valikus segaduses kipuvad tarbijad valima toote, mida nad tunnevad.
In practice, what's become apparent is that we still huddle together in groups that confirm our existing beliefs. Now, for companies who want to sell us things, manipulating that little aspect of our psychology means massive financial returns.
Some of the chance and some of the spontaneity has to be ironed out of the system for it to work. I mean, it's not a randomizer. I mean, it's doing something very deliberate. It's doing a kind of collaborative filtering, as it was called early on, and it's finding patterns, and it's trying to use those patterns to sell you something.
Recommendation engines are very good at figuring out what people like me would do and telling me what that is. So I can then find out what people like me do. I can become much more like a person like me.
We are 100% about trying to improve our consumers' enjoyment of movies. And we help them get the movies that they're going to laugh at most, cry the most, love the most. It's all about pleasing the consumer. And if that narrows, that's fine. If that broadens, that's fine.
Recommendation engines, by telling me what people like me do and encouraging me to be like a person like me, they help me to become more prototypically one of my kind of person. And the more like one of my kind of person I become, the less me I am, and the more I am a demographic type.
It may be too early to judge the long-term cultural impact of recommendation systems, but I feel that there is a deeper and more pressing concern about how we pay for a free web and our massive use of online retail. We are actively contributing to vast databases of information about ourselves. 16 years of web commerce has utterly transformed what privacy means in the 21st century.
Tuul tiibade all. 60 vallalist meest. Hirm, et abikaasa mõtleb petmisele. Kuidas end maagaasiga tappa? Kanged sõrmed. Koer, kes pissib kõige peale. Söök, mida tuleb rinnaga toites vältida. Need on reaalsed inimeste intiimsed mõtted, vaid väike murdosa anonüümsetest otsingutest, mida on sooritanud inimesed arvates, et kasutavad oma arvutit täiesti privaatselt. 2006. aastal avaldas Ameerika arvutigigant AOL faili, mis sisaldas kõiki otsinguid, mille nende 650 000 kasutajat olid eelnenud 3 kuu jooksul sooritanud. Iga kasutaja tähistas vaid number. Kuid ühele New York Timesi ajakirjanikule tegi muret, et need pealtnäha anonüümsed otsingud olid sedavõrd personaalsed, et võivad paljastada ka otsija isiku. Kui kaua võtab aega, et neid kindlaks teha?
One kind of popped out at me, I think in part because it had a lot of searches that were obviously local searches, like, landscapers in Lilburn, Georgia was the one query. And that's not something you're going to look for if this is some town, across the country from you. Chances are you're looking for a local business.
Kasutajad tunti üksnes numbri 4417749 järgi ning sama kasutaja otsingud muutusid varsti veelgi intiimsemaks.
There were a lot of searches for medical ailments, effects of nicotine. There were some things about depression, paranoia, a whole bunch about paranoia. We sort of thought this was maybe an older, lonely man with a lot of health problems.
David asus asja täpsustama. Tavaliste otsingute kõrval Lilburni äride kohta keelasid paljud otsingud ka perekonnanime Arnold ümber.
I went onto an online phone book and looked up people with that name. There were 11 of them. One of them lived on Shadow Lake, and I went back and looked in the search queries. It said Shadow Lake subdivision, Gwinnett County, Georgia. I said, that's got to be the person.
Vaid mõnetunnise tööga, kasutamata midagi muud peale otsingusõnade ja telefoniraamatu, oli David oma sihtmärgi tuvastanud. See oli 62-aastane naine Thelma Arnold.
She was pretty shocked and angry about this. She said, I had no idea someone was looking over my shoulder. My whole life is on here.
Thelma selgitas, et paljud meditsiinilise informatsiooni otsingud polnud tema enda jaoks, vaid ta sõbrale, kel interneti kasutamise võimalust polnud.
People are just typing in questions that they would probably never ask another human being, and yet, you know, here they are at their computer, and they think that the internet is the source of all knowledge, and they have no idea that anyone is recording this stuff that they're searching for.
Think back to the search terms that you've stuck into the search engines over the past week or so. It's likely that you can't remember most of them. But as the AOL story shows us, it's these incidentals that, when pieced together, can give us a surprisingly revealing picture about who we are.
There are so many things that people do on the web now which are very, very intimate. In a way, if you know what somebody's browsing on the web, you find out whether somebody is gay and wondering about coming out, looking at other people's stories. Somebody belongs to a religion that really is very different from the one around them. There are all kinds of very, very sensitive things that people do on the web.
This massive ability to communicate with other people all over the world, this massive ability to access all kinds of information and services and so on, all of that positivity has a dark side. And the darker side of the web, to some extent, includes the ability of those behind the screen, those who are providing this space for you to monitor you.
The average person seems very pragmatic about it. As long as it works, and as long as all the laws are followed, they seem perfectly happy to share personal information to make their experience better.
Erik Schmidtil on õigus. Meie veebitarbijad valisime jalgadega ja oleme tasuta tehingus kaasosalised. Meie kaasosalust illustreerib vähetuntud, kuid üsna kõnekas lõik veebi ajaloost. 2005. aastal püüdis mittetulundusühing Attention Trust meie veebi läkitatud andmete omandiõigust jalule seada. Ei kõlagi nii rumalalt, kas pole. Seda laadi asja pooldaksid miljonid. Alex Grotowski läheb kohtuma ühe asutaja Seth Kolnsteiniga, et teada saada, mis juhtus.
There's all this attention data that we're producing now online. We're spending more and more of our time online. We're spending more of our time doing social things, online. How can we claim ownership of it? Nad lõid tarkvara, mille igaüks võis alla laadida ja ühendada veebilehitsejaga nõnda, et see salvestab automaatselt meie tegevuse veebis. Siis oleme meie selle teabeomanikud, mitte Attention Trust, Google ega keegi teine. Ning ainult meie võime seda oma tingimustel kellegagi jagada. Ja tulemus? Väga vähesed vaevusid seda tehnoloogiat kasutama. Attention Trust, kõrbes põhja.
Do you think that we're perfectly happy in this trade that we're engaged in?
I don't think people know how they feel about it. So when you say perfectly happy, it's like, well, they've looked at all the alternatives and like, no, I'm happy. I think if you say they're perfectly dumb about it, dumb and happy, or sort of happy and naive, yeah, that's probably more like it. It's just not that important to them right now. There's no clear cost.
Kas me kõnnime otsa kui unes, jälgijatele sülle? Selle asemel, et mõelda informatsiooni hulgale, mida me veebis jagame ja kuidas see võib meile hiljem kätte maksta.
There are a lot of sort of social critics who say this is exactly how you devolve into, a fascist state or a socialist state or a dictatorship, which is you invite it in and ignore the consequences and all of a sudden it's 1984, and I think there's some merit in that. Orwellik tulevik võib olla veidi ülepingutatud. Ent kui veebis talletatakse meie kohta tohutul hulgal andmeid, pole küsimus enam niivõrd selles, kes seda valdab, vaid kes võib vallata seda tundmatus tulevikus. Dana Boyd on Harvardi ülikooli sotsioloog, kes teab ajaloost õppetunde, kuidas täna kogutud andmetel võivad olla homme täiesti ootamatud tagajärjed.
There's been times in history where we've collected mass amounts of data without even thinking about how it would get used in the future, often for really good intentions. A good example of that is in the early 1900s, the Netherlands started collecting all sorts of information about its citizens for the best of intentions. One of the bits of data they collected during that period was people's religion in order to give people a proper burial. They had no idea that in 1939, when the Nazis invaded the Netherlands, that data would be used for how it was used. We have companies collecting massive amounts of data about citizens. People don't have an imagination of what it means to aggregate all of that data going forward. They have these expectations of what possible terrible things can be done with these huge digital dossiers. Frankly, most companies aren't quite sure what to do with them yet. The companies are still trying to work it out, which is why they're collecting all of this data. And they're not quite sure where it's going.
Kuid vahest tekitavad nende hiiglaslike automaatsete andmebaaside kõrval sama palju mured ka need, kus me avaldame priitahtsi enda kohta intiimset informatsiooni. Veebi suure uuenduskuuri pärast Google'it on läbi teinud sotsiaalmeedia, kus suheldakse videote, mikroblogide ning selliste veebilehtedega nagu Facebook ja MySpace vahendusel. Selle revolutsiooni eesotsas on noored ja Dana Boyd on uurinud, mida nad arvavad elust interneti kommertsruumis.
There's so much data being collected about us online. Do you think that kids are complicit with this? Do you think that they know what's going on? Or do you think that they're naive about what's going to happen with their data trail?
The irony is that young people actually understand the corporation advertising trade-off better than they understand the long-term implications of that data and information. So one of the things you'll hear from young people is they'll say, well, if it gives me ads, that means it'll be free. And, I'd rather it be free. And part of it is they've never known a non-commercial world. Advertising is pervasive in their lives.
Koos veebiga üles kasvanud uus põlvkond võib kommertsreaalsust isegi tervitada, vastu tasuks tasuta mugavuse eest. Kuid kas nad ei ütle sellega lahti väärtustest, mida omaaegne veeb tõotas?
What we've done is limited the range of human expression and activity on the internet to those things that are market friendly. Look at the devolution of people's personal presence online from the quirky, individualistic, highly personalized websites, the home pages of the HTML mid-90s, to the now utterly conformist and rigid profiles on something like MySpace and Facebook. You can no longer define yourself by anything. You must define yourself by what books you buy, by what movies you like, by what actresses you aspire to, by whether you are single, married, or looking. By things that the market understands.
Ent noorema põlvkonna probleemid lähevad veelgi kaugemale. Muret teeb see, et nad ei mõista digitaalse informatsiooni üht põhitõde. Kui miski on veebi jõudnud, on seda peaaegu võimatu kustutada.
All of our interactions on the web, from our Facebook and Twitter status updates, to news that we share with family and friends, to gossip that's spread about us, will be online forever. The web effectively makes us immortal. The upside is that we can live on. There are thousands of dead people who are still receiving updates and even being poked on Facebook. But the downside is that young people who are growing up in public by living so much of their lives on the web will have to face living with all of their youthful indiscretions that can now be accessed by anyone. Future bosses, future partners, future friends. And that's for the rest of their lives.
The fact that you are just a regular person does not entitle you to any guarantee that pictures of you drunk and passed out are not going to be spread across the internet. And so in a sense, we all have to live like celebrities because there's that potential that we'll be treated like them.
One of the biggest threats comes from consumers themselves. Young people in particular who are having, no doubt, wonderful fun on social networking sites, meeting lots of people, but forgetting the permanency of that kind of engagement.
If people consider companies holding their DNA fingerprint, they somehow get a lot more emotionally disturbed by the thought that decisions might be taken about insurance, healthcare provision, lifestyle on the basis of that genetic fingerprint. The digital fingerprint is every bit as valuable.
Do you really want these intimate details about yourself to be available to so many people? And will you feel the same way about what you did last night, not just in the morning, but 40 years later?
Me oleme näinud, kuidas me kõik oleme veidi oma privaatsusest maha müünud.
kasutades interneti otsingumootorit või suheldes. Vastutasuks tasuta veebi eest on muutunud meie privaatsus kaubaks. Me oleme uuel kommertseesliinil majandusetturid. Me oleme sõlminud selle tehingu paljudel juhtudel teadmatusest, sest me ei pea oma internetitoimetusi tehinguks. Oma arvuti taga kodus või surfates mobiiltelefoni vahendusel reisil arvame end viibivad suletud privaatses mullis, kuid interneti avatud võrgustike reaalsus on see, et meie elu on alati avalik. Kõike, mida me oma arvuti taga teeme, on võimalik näha, analüüsida ja teistel kogu maailmas kasutada.
The web disrupts our sense of public and private space. We're not just transacting with one computer, we're actually having a conversation with a multitude of computers across the globe, and we're being watched. That is what makes this such a revolution and the dawn of a new era.
Some genies, when they're let out of a bottle, can cause problems, and they certainly can't ever go back in the bottle. When cars first arose, people were horrified at the deaths on the road. Horrified. They couldn't believe it. I mean, there were hundreds of people being squelched every day. It was grotesque. And if you just braked in a car at 30 miles an hour, you'd kill yourself on the steering wheel, you'd break your neck. People were dying all the time. Did they say, oh, that's it then? We can't have cars. Sorry. In the same way as if someone says, actually, these mobile phones do give out microwaves, and they will give you brain cancer. And we're going to say, oh, well, that's the end of that technology then. Not on your Nelly. There's a risk-reward ratio here. And for us, the reward is so great that whatever the risk is, we try and contain it and understand it.
I don't like this extremist view that the web is suddenly a danger zone where unpleasant people can more easily find their vulnerable targets. That's the extremities, as it always has been in every society, and as long as you educate to make people safe, I think the bulk of what happens in the web is interesting, exciting, supportive, fun, entertaining and magic.
Paradoksaalsel kombel pakub seesama veeb, mis muudab meid kaitsetumaks kui kunagi varem, ka imelist võimalust jagada, uidata ja nuhutada ringi inimteadmiste varasalves. Ent kui veebis hakkab määrama kommerts, peame üles ärkama, mõistma tasuta teenuse tõelist hinda ning viise, kuidas internet hindab ümber privaatsuse, isikliku ruumi ja lõpuks ka meid ennast.